Action.
Oh, that was a good cheers,
Clink,
Adam.
clink. So I requested these. Cheers.
Mm.
Ooh,
That hits
the
different in the
spot.
morning. Oh,
No, I wanted us to have the, and I feel like this is like breakfast of champions and lunch and dinner for any musician.
that's true. Adam, you have this very deep history with Eastman's music. You've played it as much, if not more, than any pianist around. And I'm curious if you have any recollections of the first time you encountered his music.
I remembered hearing about him amongst friends, like at a post-show dinner, and people were describing to me this like politically radical, queer, gay, post-minimalist, like man, this artist who was a composer, a dancer, a singer, a pianist. And I was like, who are you? Who is this? That happened. And then I started to kind of dig, and like a lot of people became like instantly fascinated by his life and by the music, the sort of surviving archival recordings of his pieces. I feel like listeners and performers alike felt like we were also sort of rediscovering this music. Eastman was classically trained. The music
Right.
is unconventional, but he's from Ithaca,
yes,
and was around like adjacent to classical tradition. He was a really classically trained pianist. Like
went to Curtis.
And his early recitals are like piano recital,
Yep.
like piano music. It's interesting to watch him sort of weave through different communities, though, as an artist and as a person. So in some communities, he's known as a singer with Meredith Monk and, Peter Maxwell Davies,
Yeah.
and working as like a singer. Pierre Boulez is conducting him. So he's there, but then he's also a pianist,
Mm-hmm.
and then he's also a composer, and he's also on a backing track of a disco song, and he's here and he's there, and he's also like outspoken and gay, and he's actually saying that in newspapers. I want to be gay to the fullest, an artist to the fullest, black to the fullest. And I think we take for granted now that that's like a normal thing to do. In like, 70s, 80s or earlier, like it's not that, it's a very unusual, unique, bold thing for an artist to do.
Both Eastman and Martland, the way that their history kind of unfolded, especially in their like early life and how they were trained. I mean, Martland studied with Andreessen in a very sort of like formalistic, like educational setting. Ditto with Eastman, as you were saying. But both of their practices and the way that they approached music, it kind of upended the expectations of that training in like very interesting ways. I mean, Martland's music, you can hear the sort of echoes of, or like very subtle influences of Andreessen, but like the music is so like unabashedly its own.
Yeah.
And Eastman's, I think, is even more radically like not dismissive, but like disinterested in the tradition.
I feel like in many ways Eastman was inventing like notational languages to create textures and sounds and that sounded similar to things that were around him, but he wanted to sort of hotwire it to his own community building, or like, I'm going to create this score so that it's more about people, how it's built is going to be different from, say, a piece like Merlin, where all the notes and rhythms are there, like, as we know, to like the micro subdivision. But that's also community building in its own way, because what is our rehearsal process but like this really like vulnerable state of constant failure?
Yeah.
thing that's interesting about Martland, that I find interesting, that is similar to Eastman in sort of who they are, is that they also just were very comfortable with aligning themselves with non-classical sort of entities and traditions. Like, so Martland's recordings, which again, like, it shows that we're still making peace with the fact that Eastman sort of died in obscurity and we're still sort of rediscovering this music. Well, Martland, it's really like that too. The recordings I'm about to speak of are out of print.
Yeah.
They're really hard to find. I wanted to like check a liner note of something, and I have to go to the New York Public Library. I have to like get it out of their archive to just like look at the liner notes. So it's really hard to access his music, to be honest. But those recordings are on the same like label as Joy Division.
Right.
And like he was aligning, and in interviews he's talking about jungle music and techno, and like he was so heavily influenced by that in a very similar way that like Eastman would stay on it, and just his own ethic and how he moved in the world was totally comfortable with bringing in other sort of genres and practices to the table. So they both, it's sort of like you said, it's hard to find the right word. It's not dismissal, and it's not even rejecting of classical musician, but you're like, yeah, maybe it's disinterest. It's like, I don't need to be so committed and aligned to this institution. Martland's very aware of that when you see him in interviews. He's talking about like, I want nothing to do with these composers who are appearing with the BBC proms, and I don't like their music, and I don't think they like their music. Like, he's really outspoken about it, and he characterizes himself as arrogant. He's like, I know I'm arrogant, but I want nothing to do with that bourgeois journey of legacy and having some sort of like thing to show for yourself, which is interesting for like a composer who's classically trained and like kind of in this institution of classical music. And Eastman I find to be really similar. I mean, of course, there's been all these sort of myth building about how the scores were lost and he let them go, but there's paradoxes there. There's other pieces that he really was shopping around to performers, and he wanted certain pieces to survive, but I don't think he was interested in becoming like famous or making sure that people really remembered gay Guerrilla, and so on. So I find that an interesting parallel between them, like so fiercely individual.
Yeah. Adam, as someone who has played Eastman for a number of years, do you have any insight about why his music is now speaking so powerfully to audiences and to performers?
When people have a sense of discovery and that they are participating as listeners in sort of, I don't know, the activation of a composer's work, that sense of discovery is really exciting, and it's really seductive, and it's addictive. You want more. I want to hear more about this person. And I've been thinking a lot about how, thank goodness, we're hearing more of Eastman's music now, when so much of it, all of it, was nearly lost. Another kind of fascinating thing I think about both composers that I find that they have in common, there is a certain sort of queerness to this program. Just as Eastman was sort of outspoken and moved around his community with a certain kind of outspoken queerness, while Steve Martland was very private, it's still striking to see his headshots of him like shirtless and looking like very sexy and really really exuding sort of this sort of youthful virility that feels queer. And again, I'm not characterizing him in any way, but there is a certain presentation of him as an artist that is very unusual in the classical community. Just like when we talk to people about Eastman, they'll say he came into rehearsal with like a bottle of bourbon and chains hanging from wearing leather, and I'm just like, interesting, But the way they presented themselves had a certain sort of, again, an iconoclastic sort of nature to them, which presented queerness in an interesting way, or sexuality in an interesting way. And I feel like the music also touches on that.
Yeah. Adam, the last time we played this as a duo was outside in the well, it was still very pandemic, but it was
We were
when
outside and masked.
we were outside
So
and
that's
masked. So
how
that was the
pandemic it
era,
was.
right? It was it was outside masked era pandemic, but it was right when New York City started kind of peeking around the corner and saying, is it okay to like have more than 5 people outside masked to listen to music? And we played Gay Guerrilla and some music by some friends of ours. But I'm thinking now about the experience of that piece outside at that time with you, just 2 pianists. That was also the first time I'd played the piece. And what journey has happened since then, just personally with my experience with Eastman's music and my experience playing other pieces of his.
I'm getting so emotional.
I know.
I am.
No, I'll tell you what, because the thing that is the best thing about from then until now, and I really am getting like emotional, is like we've become such good friends.
That's true.
This question that I saw last night in a movie about a cult, but anyway, this person asked the question. She said, how do you know you're in love? You can't answer it. And again, it's sort of that question of like, why now? And I don't know why, but you and I, we knew we had to do that piece.
Yeah.
And I don't know why these pieces feel perfect together, but they do.
Yeah.
And I feel like they're going to activate with each other in a space. You and I will inevitably, but also with our listeners, that that sort of trinity of the music, the performers, and our listeners, it just pops, it activates. And with this music, it really activates.